The air in the living room was thick with a silence that screamed louder than any argument. My parents, sitting on the faded floral sofa, looked at me with an expression I knew all too well, a mix of exhaustion and pity. Pity for me, their fragile daughter, who had just been rejected from yet another top university. My brother Ethan sat opposite me, his posture rigid. He was the perfect son, the one with the grades, the scholarships, the acceptance letter from Stanford tucked away safely in his backpack. I hated him for it. "Honey, don't worry," my mother said, her voice soft and saccharine. "Your father and I will figure something out." My father nodded, his hand resting on her knee. "We know how much you wanted to go to an Ivy League school, Sarah. We'll make sure it happens." I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to say something. He just stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. I knew he was thinking about his savings. The money he had worked 2 jobs for since he was 16, the money he had been saving for his engineering degree. It was his future, neatly stacked in a bank account. And I, in my self-serving mind, saw it as my lifeboat. "But what about—" Ethan started, his voice barely a whisper. My father cut him off. "Don't worry, son. We'll use some of your savings for Sarah. It's for family." The words hung in the air, a cruel, blunt instrument. Ethan's face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks until he looked like a ghost. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pain so profound it should have made me flinch. But it didn't. All I saw was an opportunity. This was my chance to get everything I deserved. "Thank you," I said, my voice sweet. I gave my parents a tearful smile, a performance I had perfected over the years. They hugged me, assuring me everything would be okay. As they comforted me, I glanced over at Ethan. He was still frozen, his future dissolving right before his eyes. A small, cruel thrill ran through me. It was a victory. My victory. The days that followed were a blur of college applications and a sickeningly sweet display of parental devotion. My parents were constantly doting on me, treating me like a wounded bird that needed to be nursed back to health. Ethan, on the other hand, was an afterthought. He moved through the house like a phantom, his silence a heavy presence. We barely spoke, but his resentment was a palpable thing, a thick, cold wall between us. I found myself justifying my actions. He had his chance, his grades, his perfect life. Why shouldn't I get a piece of that? I told myself it was for a greater good, my future, which was just as important as his. I wasn't a bad person. I was a desperate one. I was just taking what was offered to me. It wasn't my fault my parents were the ones who made the decision. That was my convenient lie. One evening I found Ethan in the garage, meticulously organizing his tools. He was always so methodical, so careful with everything he owned. It was a stark contrast to my chaotic, impulsive nature. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice a carefully crafted mix of concern and innocence. He didn't look up. "Just organizing." "I'm really sorry about everything," I said, a small lie slipping off my tongue. He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were cold. "Are you? Or are you just sorry you got caught in the middle of it?" His words stung, but I pushed the feeling away. "No, I'm sorry you have to go through this. I didn't ask them to use your money." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "No, you didn't. But you didn't stop them either. You didn't say, 'Mom and Dad, that's Ethan's money. He worked for that.' You just let it happen." He was right. I hadn't. And in that moment, the weight of my selfishness settled on me for the first time. But it wasn't enough to make me change my mind. The promise of a prestigious college, of a life I felt I was entitled to, was too strong to be given up. I walked away, leaving him alone with his tools and his shattered dreams. A few months later, I received my acceptance letter to a good, but not top-tier, private university. The tuition was staggering. My parents, true to their word, transferred Ethan's life savings to cover my first year. The digital transaction was a cold, impersonal act, but the consequences were deeply personal. The day the money was moved, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and guilt. I celebrated with my parents, but the thought of Ethan and what he must be feeling gnawed at me. Ethan moved out a week later. He didn't tell us where he was going. He simply packed a bag, left a note on the kitchen counter, and vanished. The note was short, a single line. I can't be here anymore. My parents were frantic, calling everyone they knew, but Ethan was gone. He had a part-time job as a waiter to make ends meet and decided to take a gap year, living with a friend. My mother cried. My father was filled with a silent rage, but I felt a strange sense of relief. The source of my guilt was gone. My new life at college was a whirlwind of new faces and experiences. I embraced the freedom, the parties, the late-night study sessions. I was surrounded by people who didn't know about my family's secret, people who saw me as smart, social, and destined for success. I had everything I wanted: a great school, a comfortable life, and no nagging reminders of the price I had paid. I'd call my parents occasionally, but I never asked about Ethan. They mentioned him in hushed, worried tones, but I'd quickly change the subject. The thought of him was a ghost in my new, carefully constructed reality, a shadow I chose to ignore. I focused on my studies, my social life, and my carefully curated image. The guilt would surface sometimes, usually in the quiet of the night, when I was alone with my thoughts. I'd remember the look on Ethan's face when my father spoke those words, the way his shoulders slumped as he left, but I'd push the memories down, burying them under new experiences, new friendships, and new justifications. I had what I wanted, and that, I told myself, was all that mattered. My first semester ended, and I returned home for the holidays. The house felt different, empty. Ethan's room was exactly as he had left it, a shrine to a life interrupted. His bed was neatly made, books stacked on his desk, a guitar gathering dust in the corner. My parents' sadness was a constant presence, a cloud that followed them from room to room. They tried to be happy for my sake, but their smiles never reached their eyes. I tried to fill the void. I suggested we go shopping for new Christmas decorations, that we bake cookies, that we watch old family movies. But every activity was tainted by Ethan's absence. The memories of the four of us laughing, of his quiet, steady presence, made the current reality feel hollow. The joy I had so easily found at college was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing sense of unease. One afternoon, I was helping my mother clean out the garage. We found an old box of Ethan's from his high school days. Inside were his report cards, a worn-out baseball glove, and a small, faded notebook. My mother picked it up, her fingers tracing the cover. She opened it to a random page. It was a list of all the things he was saving for. New books for college, a laptop for his engineering programs, a down payment on a small apartment. Each item had a specific dollar amount next to it. My throat tightened as I realized the numbers on that page were the exact ones my parents had transferred to my account. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she read the list. He had it all planned out, she whispered, her voice breaking. He was so responsible. I looked away, a lump in my throat. This was the first time I felt the full weight of what I had done, not just to Ethan, but to my parents. I had taken their hope, their son's future, and replaced it with a hollow victory. The money had brought me to a new life, but it had also driven a wedge through my family, leaving behind a wound that seemed to get deeper with every passing day. Weeks turned into months, and Ethan's silence became the new normal. My parents tried to find him, but he was a ghost. He changed his phone number, blocked them on social media. My mother's attempts to reach out were met with silence. I too tried to find him. I would scour social media, search for his name online, but he had effectively vanished. The guilt, once a fleeting shadow, was now a constant companion, a heavy blanket of regret. My college life, once so vibrant, began to lose its luster. The constant parties felt hollow, the friendships superficial. I was a fraud, and I knew it. The whispers of my conscience were growing louder, drowning out the shallow excitement of my life. I was surrounded by people, yet I felt more alone than ever. I started to notice the little things I had taken for granted. The sound of Ethan's guitar practice drifting from his room, the way he would patiently explain a math problem to me, the easy camaraderie we once shared. One night, I was on the phone with my mother. She was crying. "We miss him so much, Sarah," she said, her voice strained. "Your father and I, we regret it. We should have never done that to him. We were so wrong." Her words were a punch to the gut. They weren't just a revelation of their regret. They were an acknowledgement of my complicity. I had stood by and watched as my brother's future was dismantled for my benefit. I had been selfish, cruel, and cowardly. My carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble, brick by brick. The emptiness of the house during the holidays had been a temporary sadness. Now it was a permanent void, a hole in our family that I had helped create. I realized that the price of my success was not just Ethan's savings, but his presence, his love, and my own peace of mind. I had won the battle, but I was losing the war. The weight of my guilt became unbearable. It was a physical thing, a constant pressure on my chest. I knew I had to do something, anything, to make things right. The first step, I realized, was to admit the truth to my parents. Not just that I was sorry, but that I had always been aware of the cost of their decision. I called them one evening, my hands trembling. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice choked with emotion. "I have to tell you something." I confessed everything. I told them how I had silently celebrated the day they decided to use Ethan's savings, how I had conveniently looked the other way, how I had not once tried to stop them. I confessed my resentment, my jealousy, and my profound selfishness. The words came out in a torrent of shame and regret, a dam of lies finally breaking. There was silence on the other end of the line. A long, painful silence that stretched on forever. Then my father's voice, quiet and filled with a deep sadness, came through the speaker. "We know, Sarah. We've always known." His words were a revelation. They had seen through my performance, my tearful smiles, my innocent act. They had chosen to ignore it, to protect me from myself, to give me what I wanted, and in doing so, they had sacrificed their son and their own peace. My confession didn't bring me the relief I had expected. It didn't make the pain go away. Instead, it exposed a deeper truth. My parents' mistakes were born out of a flawed love for me, a love that had blinded them. My mistake, however, was born out of pure, unadulterated selfishness. And that realization was a new kind of torture. A year and a half after he left, I finally found him. Not by searching the internet, but through a mutual friend from high school. She told me Ethan was working at a small local tech company in Seattle, saving up again. The moment she gave me his address, my heart started to pound. This was it. The moment I had been dreading and longing for. I flew to Seattle, a city of perpetual rain that mirrored my mood. I stood outside his apartment building, a small, unassuming place with a single potted plant by the door. I took a deep breath and knocked. He opened the door, and for a moment, he was a stranger. His face was leaner, his eyes older, and a thin, new scar ran across his eyebrow. But it was him, and the look on his face, a mix of shock and icy coldness, was a reflection of the gulf between us. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" he asked, his voice flat. I need to talk to you, Ethan. I need to apologize, I stammered, my carefully rehearsed words sounding hollow. He didn't invite me in. He just leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. For what, exactly? For letting Mom and Dad use my savings? For not stopping them? For not even trying to? His questions were like a series of stabs. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, the weight of my past actions a suffocating presence. I told him about the guilt, the regret, the void I felt in my life. I told him how empty I felt, how the victory I had once savored had turned to ash. You have no idea what it was like, Sarah, he said, his voice finally breaking with emotion. I had it all planned out, and in one sentence it was gone, and you just watched it happen. He shook his head, a single bitter tear running down his cheek. You're sorry because you're finally facing the consequences, not because you truly regret what you did. His words were a brutal, truthful indictment. I had no defense. He was right. I was sorry, but my sorrow was rooted in my own pain, not his. He was still in the doorway, but I felt 1,000 miles away. The distance was not just physical. It was a chasm of broken trust and shattered dreams that I had created. I returned home a broken person. The confrontation with Ethan had not brought the closure I had hoped for. Instead, it had confirmed the chasm between us, a reminder that some wounds don't heal. My parents, who had watched me grow up, saw the change in me. They saw the emptiness in my eyes, the slump in my shoulders. They tried to comfort me, to tell me that everything would be okay, but I knew it wouldn't. The guilt I had run from had finally caught up to me. I began to struggle academically. My grades, once a source of pride, plummeted. The ambition that had once fueled me was gone, replaced by a paralyzing sense of futility. My social life fizzled out. I pushed people away, unable to hide the profound sadness that had taken over my life. The expensive degree I had so ruthlessly pursued felt like a cruel joke, a monument to my worst self. I realized I was paying a different kind of price. The money, the education, the opportunities, they were all tainted. They were a constant reminder of the cost to my family. The life I had stolen from Ethan, the peace of mind I had sacrificed, was now a debt I couldn't repay. I was losing myself, piece by piece, to the consequences of my own actions. My parents, in their desperation, tried to help me. They suggested therapy, a break from school, anything to see me happy again. But I was beyond their help. The only person who could fix this was me, and I had no idea where to start. I had lived my life for so long as the selfish, entitled daughter, and I had no idea how to be anything else. I took a leave of absence from college. The thought of stepping back into that world, built on a foundation of lies and selfishness, was unbearable. I moved back home, to the empty house that still held the ghost of Ethan. His room was just as he had left it, a permanent reminder of my biggest mistake. My days were a monotonous cycle of regret. I tried to find a job, but my resume was filled with a degree I hadn't earned and a lack of real-world experience. The world I had so desperately wanted to be a part of was rejecting me, just as I had rejected my brother. The irony was not lost on me. One afternoon, I was rummaging through a box of old photos and found a picture of Ethan and me when we were kids. He was a small, freckle-faced boy, his arm wrapped around my shoulder, a proud smile on his face. I remembered that day. He had just won a local science fair, and he had used his prize money to buy me a book I wanted. I looked at the picture, and a wave of memories washed over me. He wasn't just my rival. He was my brother. He had loved me, protected me, and I had betrayed him in the most profound way. I finally understood the true depth of my villainy. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the love, the trust, the family bond that I had shattered. The emptiness I felt wasn't a punishment from the universe. It was a consequence of my own choices. I had to face the truth. I was a bad person. And until I could truly acknowledge that and live with it, I would never find peace. The road to redemption, I realized, wasn't about a grand gesture or a magical fix. It was about small, painful steps. I got a job as a barista at a local coffee shop. The work was honest and hard, a stark contrast to the life I had so easily walked into. I started putting every extra dollar into a savings account. My goal wasn't just to pay Ethan back. It was to rebuild myself, one small act of integrity at a time. I called my parents and told them my plan. They were quiet, but I could hear the relief in their voices. They weren't just happy that I was changing. They were happy that their daughter, the one they had lost to selfishness, was finally on her way back. I started writing letters to Ethan. I didn't send them, not at first. I just wrote, pouring out my heart, my regrets, my apologies. I wrote about the guilt that had consumed me, the emptiness of the life I had built, and the love I had finally remembered. I wrote about the woman I had become, and the woman I hoped to be. The money I was saving grew slowly. It was a tedious, humbling process. But with every deposit, I felt a little lighter, a little more human. I was no longer the villain of my own story. I was a person trying to make things right. A year later, I had saved enough to cover my tuition. I sent a check to Ethan with a single letter. I didn't apologize. I simply stated my purpose, acknowledging that the money was a small token for a great wrong. He didn't call, he didn't write back, but I didn't expect him to. I returned to college, not with a sense of entitlement, but with a new purpose. My grades improved, not because of a desperate need for success, but because I finally found meaning in the hard work. I was no longer a villain on the run, but a person on a long, hard road back home. The emptiness was still there, but it was now a reminder, not a punishment. It was a space where my brother used to be, and I could only hope that, one day, I would be worthy enough to try and fill it again.